Welcome to Sociology of the Sweet Science. I am joined today with Mr. Bob Arum. He is the CEO of Top Rank Boxing and a former attorney in the Southern District of New York. He promoted his first fight in 1966 with Muhammad Ali and George Chuvalo, and Mr. Arum would go on to promote over 24 of Mr. Ali's fights. He is the current promoter of boxer and former guest Nico Ali Walsh, along with a plethora of other talented up-and-coming prospects, as well as superstars such as the Ukrainian lightweight, Vasily Lomachenko, and the heavyweight champion of the world, Tyson Fury. Bob, how are you today?
Good.
I would like to take this time to discuss the evolution of professional boxing over the last half century, and I can't think of another person better to talk to than the man himself, Mr. Bob Arum.
Well, again, boxing evolved in the last 50 or so, 60 years. But the evolution is really based on the technical innovations that have occurred in the world. When I first started in 1965, there were no satellites. Most television was in black and white. The big fights were shown in theaters on equipment that was black and white and didn't give a very good picture. So all of that seems like it's almost primitive, which compared to what has happened now is. And boxing and the business of boxing was enhanced step by step once we got color television, then satellites, and then we went from closed circuit to pay-per-view. But it is the ease of communications that has changed everything. For example, boxing had to compete with other sports like professional football or college football for airtime. That's ameliorated by the fact that we are now taking advantage of the streaming services, which have an almost unlimited bandwidth to show events. So when we program for ESPN, well, when ESPN is loaded on the network, we are happy to have the fight shown on ESPN Plus, which has about 27 million subscribers. Also, since we're developing young talent, they in the old days or in the past, those fights were not shown. They were lost. They weren't televised. Now every fight there's a picture on every fight, and it is the early fights are all shown on the streaming network ESPN Plus.
What were your initial feelings when signing the extension in 2018 through 2025 with ESPN? Because ESPN Plus was rather new at that time.
Well, ESPN Plus was new, and the deal was financed largely by ESPN Plus, which was just starting, rather than ESPN. We didn't know how fast it would grow. and how the athletes would react to their fights being shown on a streaming platform rather than a broadcast platform. But as it went on and as we've lived with everything, they don't care and we don't care. And streaming has opened up great new vistas for us.
What type of new vistas would those be? If you could divulge.
Well, the vistas were, if you're relying on broadcast network to show your product, there's a limited amount of airtime. And so you're competing with so many other sports and so many events. If you have an entity like ESPN, if they don't have the airtime, there's ESPN Plus that has unlimited airtime. You look at ESPN Plus, and at any given time, they have maybe 100 events that they've either shown and you can now view, or they're about to show. It's terrific. Something like we never had before. For example, there are great fighters around the world, like the Japanese champion Inoue, and he wants to fight, in addition to occasionally fighting in the United States, in Japan, where he is, one of the most popular athletes in the country. And the problem for us was that if a fight was in Japan, it will go on at 5, 6 in the morning in the East and 3 in the morning on the West Coast. And that's not ideal. But with ESPN Plus, that's solved because they show the fight live. And then you wake up, and if you want to not know the result, you put it on and you watch it from start to finish. So it's almost like watching it live.
Absolutely. And as someone who does that frequently with Inoue fights, I love that option. And I noticed that ESPN does not have as many, say, pay-per-views as a lot of other broadcasters. How do you evaluate what should be a pay-per-view and what should not be?
Well, I think that we have come to the conclusion pay-per-view was fairly viable prior to the pandemic because people were willing to pay big prices to watch the fight live because particularly in a lot of minority households, like particularly Hispanic, they would share the cost, and with the amount that they were paying for sharing, plus the cost of pizza or tacos, and beer. It was a great evening, and it was less costly than going out. But since the pandemic, people are reluctant to have big crowds of non-family members in their home because of the lingering effects of COVID and other diseases. So pay-per-view doesn't do well anymore, and we tried to find a way with our partners, ESPN, to do big fights without putting it on pay-per-view.
And would that be from the live gate as well as advertisements on television and between rounds?
Well, Livegate, it seems like it has less of an effect on Livegate because people are now, since the pandemic is behind us, more and more willing to go to arenas for entertainment, whether it be sports like boxing or basketball or concerts. I think pretty much people want to get out and go to the event. That's different from having 20 or 30 people in your home to watch a fight on television.
And during COVID, Top Rank set up a bubble to allow fighters that are signed to you guys to continue fighting. And you set up, I think it was on the 12th floor of the MGM, an entire bubble for all Top Rank staff, employees, and fighters. And that was launched in June of 2020, I believe. Can you talk about the process of setting that up?
Yeah, we had, when the pandemic hit and really everything began to close down, we immediately tried to determine how we could continue having our fighters fight. And because we were, one company, unlike a league, we could move quickly. And we brought in doctors and experts, and we worked out a COVID plan, which enabled us to go forward with the bubble, which I think the NBA took part of to create their own bubble subsequently, which enabled them to get a season going. So we were very proud of the bubble. It worked well. We learned a lot. We'd have, say, 8 or 9 fights that we would schedule on a particular night, and we'd have the fighters come in early, and we were getting, of the 9 fights, maybe 3 cancellations. We'd end up with 6 fights, and we ascertained the reason was that the guys, when they got the call to fight, got on a plane and came to Las Vegas to enter the bubble, and lo and behold, they tested positive for COVID. So we required fighters and the managers, particularly managers more than fighters, who could taint the fighter, to get COVID tests before they boarded a plane. And then when they got to Vegas, we tested them, and we tested them during the week. And we had a facility, a gym set up at the MGM where they could train. And we had a dining at the convention area, a dining room to feed everybody breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so we got through that period operating with 2 events every week, which is much more than we do in normal times.
And while Top Rank has countless world-class boxers, you guys have always been known for having some of the best prospects and future contenders out there. In the many years you've been involved with Top Rank, has the process of discovering and signing new talent changed, whether it be focusing on, say, the Golden Gloves, the national championships, or the Olympics more?
Well, yeah, it has changed because prior, uh, and particularly a number of years ago, we'd hear about fighters, how great they were, and how there was going to be superstars, and we'd have to take it with a grain of salt because we hadn't seen them, and we relied on people that we felt had some expertise. But now every fight that a kid has in the amateurs, there's a telecast on. There's footage, so it cuts down on a lot of errors that we were otherwise making.
And those errors that you speak of, would it be believing the hype train that a lot of people would push?
If you don't have access to footage, then you have to believe in the hype. And if you felt that the guy giving you the hype was reliable, you would maybe go along with that. Maybe you test the guy in the ring for a couple of fights. But with the ability, everybody has footage, and all these amateur programs, one way or the other, there's footage. And so we can see for ourselves, without having been there, if the guy really has promise.
And on the complete opposite side of prospects, I would like to ask about Tyson Fury, because you co-promote him with Frank Warren of Queensberry in the UK. And I was wondering, how does it work to co-promote one fighter?
Well, I've known Frank for many, many years. And Queensberry is a really professional organization, and our two companies work extremely well together. And Frank was our co-promoter when we promoted Tyson Fury in the United States. And I think we opened up a big market for Fury in the US. And so that when he went back to the UK, he was absolutely massive. So again, if you know people, like any business, if you know people and you trust them, you can work with them seamlessly. We never have any arguments, at least to date, we haven't. And we work everything out, and it's been a good relationship.
Why is it that a promoter like Frank Warren at Queensberry and Top Rank can have very amicable relationship, whereas say a PBC is a difficult promoter to book fights with?
Well, there's history that when PBC was formed, they got a lot of money from a hedge fund, and part of their business plan was they would drive all promoters out of business and be the sole promoter. Now that's no longer, part of their plan, but that whole experience stays with everybody. And again, it's easier for, say, us to have a really collegial relationship with Queensberry and Frank Warren because they operate primarily in the UK and we operate in the United States primarily.
And the I think last week I heard you say that Fury Usyk is definitely going to happen, and it will happen in the first 4 months of next year. Is that still on track?
Yes, it will happen.
And I take it that will be in the Middle East.
Not necessarily. I mean, the Middle East, uh, Usyk made a big hit in the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia, with his two fights that he had against Joshua. And his manager, Igis Klimas, is a good friend of mine, made good contacts there. And it's clear that more money can be made having the fight in Saudi Arabia than any other place. But they move very, very slowly, and sometimes it gets very complicated, and there's a preference to do the fight in a massive way in the UK, where we do it at Wembley for about 95,000 people, and do good, very good pay-per-view in the UK, and some decent pay-per-view because of the time in the United States. And it feels like it would be a bigger event in the UK than in Saudi Arabia. That being said, if the Saudis came with the money that they've been talking about, it's hard to turn away that kind of money in order to do a more spectacular event in London.
Now, when certain fights go to purse bids, what causes that compared to, say, something like this, where you have the option to choose between Saudi Arabia or a fight at Wembley? So what gives you that access and flexibility?
Well, the purse bid has nothing to do with where the fight's going to be. Purse bid is if a fighter is a champion, and an organization says that it's time for him to fight the number one contender, who's considered the mandatory contender, then the organization generally gives 30 days for the parties to work out a deal. And if they can't, it goes to purse bid. And because otherwise, those fights could never happen or might never happen. So, I mean, it's a cumbersome system, but it seems in most cases to work.
And because both Usyk and Fury have fought within the last 6 months, there would be no mandatory for there to be a purse bid in the first place, correct?
No, there wouldn't be a mandatory because Fury is the champion of one organization and Usyk's the champion of three organizations. And they're the four organizations that matter. So there's no purse bid. The only purse bid could be if an organization said you had to fight the number one contender. And then that would preclude the fighters from fighting each other. So that's one of the reasons why we want to get this fight done in the first 4 months, so we have one champion, and then we'll worry about the mandatories.
And there hasn't been a single champion since the 20th century. It was 1999. I was curious, you mentioned earlier that you don't think the fight will be as big in the US as it would be in the UK, well, partially because of time zones. You don't think the fight would maybe have a larger appeal now that Fury has fought Wilder here several times, and it is the first unified heavyweight championship since '99?
Yeah, it will. It will. But what I'm saying is, economically, it belongs in the UK. It belongs in London for 95,000 plus massive pay-per-view numbers. That means that when we televise it and put it on pay-per-view, it would start at 6, 7 o'clock in the evening in New York. The fight would go on because it's 5 hours difference. So even if you delayed the start of the fight, usually couldn't delay it before. You delay it to about 11 o'clock. So that would mean that it would go on at 6 o'clock in the East. But unfortunately, that would mean 3 in the afternoon in the West Coast. And that's why the numbers wouldn't be as robust in the United States as if the fight was in the United States and it was put on during the hours that people are used to watching a big event.
And with that model in mind, when you are dealing with, say, a fighter like Inoue in Japan, that those fights are not on pay-per-view. So it allows for people, as you said, to watch them in the morning. With a fight like this, because it would be a pay-per-view, would people not purchase it after the fact and watch it in the morning?
No. People, I mean, some people might purchase it and watch it after the fact, but pretty much if you're paying that kind of money, you're paying it to watch it live.
Absolutely. And as far as the upcoming prospects you have Jared Anderson, who I had the pleasure of meeting and getting to see fight at the Garden earlier this month. And he's only 23, 24, and is already making a name for himself in the heavyweight division. What are your plans for him as a fighter, and how is it managing him at the same time as a champion like Tyson Fury?
Well, it's totally different because a problem with Jarrett is not that we doubt his ability, because we don't. And we're going to be stepping up his level of competition next year. But the major problem we have with Jarrett is he's so good that he knocks his opponent out in the early rounds. And so our matchmakers are concerned about his stamina. I mean, if some fighter, and sometime it'll happen, it always happens, takes him into the late rounds, will he run out of gas? I don't think so, but until you see it, you don't know.
Can you talk about your relationship with Top Rank's matchmakers and the oversight that you have on the fights that you make?
Well, yeah, I mean, we pretty much the main event and sometimes the semi-main event, it's a collaborative effort. It's with the matchmakers, it's with Carl Moretti, and with our finance people as to whether we can afford it and so forth. And at that particular point, after we make those fights, the main event and the semi-main event, then the rest of the fights on the card, we have the matchmakers do completely. The reason for that is it's the main event and the semi-main event that attracts the audience, and also, frankly, sells the tickets at the live gate. And so that requires a lot more scrutiny.
Absolutely. And I wanted to end on asking you what you're most excited about in 2023 in boxing outside of maybe Fear Usyk.
I'm really most excited. Uh, we operate now on two levels, really. We have the fighters that we have are pretty well known, like Shakur, Navarrete, and and we continue to push and Beterbiev. We continue to push their careers because they've reached the top, and now they can make really good purses, and they're fairly big attractions. And then we have this whole group of youngsters who we've signed and we started developing, and those will be the stars of the future. And we've got to manage that really carefully, so we lead most of them to success. Now, I'm really enthused about Jared Anderson, but also Xander Zayas is a terrific prospect, and Keyshawn Davis is really, really terrific, and Richie Torres, another one that we have a lot of high hopes for, and there are a lot of them like that. So we have to nurture those young men up through the ranks. And in the meantime, feature fighters like Fury and Shakur and Josh Taylor and Teofimo Lopez and Haney and Lomachenko. So it's a lot of work. We do around 30 events a year for ESPN. In addition, we acquire the rights for another 24 events from around the world to show on ESPN Plus. So that's really full time. And our social media department has gone from non-existent to 1 or 2 to now about 10. And what's happening in Top Rank is really embracing the new media and the new opportunities which didn't exist years ago.
Thank you so much for your time, Bob, and for having me at your events at the Garden this year. It could not be more of a privilege to attend. I look forward to seeing you in the new year, and I wish you a Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.